From the massive studios in Raleigh, North Carolina, this is the Cloudcast with Aaron Delp and Brian Gracely, presented by a cloud guru, bringing you the best of cloud computing from around the world.
Good morning, good evening, wherever you are. Welcome back to the Cloudcast. We are coming to you live from the massive studios here in Raleigh, North Carolina. Aaron, how are you? Good to have you back. And are you dug out from the blizzard we had a couple days ago?
Yes, dug out from the blizzard, doing well. About the only thing, though, is not running yet. So, I'm going to cram for the Krispy Kreme run, it appears, this year. But, hey, that's fine.
Yeah, speaking of the Krispy Kreme run, we have a little bit of housekeeping to do. I have two things on the housekeeping list today. The first one is the Krispy Kreme run, kind of our ask. We are basically 2 weeks away from the run. We're a little slower this year in terms of donations. We're at about 56%. So, folks, as always, if you feel it in your heart, you want to make a donation, help some children, help their families. It's always a good thing. 100% of the donations, 100% of the proceeds go to the North Carolina Children's Hospital. We love to represent the community. So anything you can do to make a donation, $1, $5, $10, whatever it might be possible, we would love to go represent the community that way.
And to all our listeners out in the Raleigh area, if you're interested in actually signing up for this thing, you still can, and we'd love to run with you as well.
Yeah, it'd be fun. Come run, come walk, come sit and eat some donuts with us. So, Aaron, I was looking at the calendar, and February 3rd is sort of an interesting day. So February 3rd is the Krispy Kreme run race. And I just noticed, it just got announced, February 3rd, tickets go on sale for the summer Def Leppard / Journey tour. Def Leppard finally put all their music out on all the streaming services. You can go get it now. What's your thoughts on Def Leppard in general? I know you're a heavy metal, hard rock kind of guy.
Well, if they gave into streaming and they're going on tour, it means they need money again. Yeah, first of all,
true.
But I've been a huge fan for years, and I've never seen them. I've seen a lot of concerts, and they are on the list, and I haven't seen them yet, so I'm almost definitely there in some way, shape, or form. They're coming here, Charlotte and Columbia, South Carolina. I've already checked. So I'm in. All right. For Def Leppard and Journey.
Good. Well, listen, I'm gonna introduce our guest, and we may have to bring him into this conversation I want to have, and it's not cloud related, but you know what? It's our show, and we can fill the time any way we want to. So good to have on our sort of chief DevOps / SRE field correspondent, Rob Hirschfeld. Rob, great to have you back on the show again.
Brian, Aaron, it's great to be back. I love what you've done with the massive studios, by the way.
Thank you.
Yeah, nice additions. I can see where Tyler set up his desk, and I really appreciate the Kubernetes themed Krispy Kremes. I think that's a really nice touch.
Thank you. Well, listen, Rob, you've been around. You're sort of the same genre as us. Were you a fan of music with loud guitars in it at one point in time?
I have indulged in that. I think I went to the Kiss concert when it was touring in Austin.
Okay,
not that long ago, actually.
So I got to ask you guys, like, if you had to put, like Aaron said, every band hits a point where they got to go out on the road and try and make some money to pay for their fourth Castle and their eighth Ferrari and whatever they're doing. Where would you guys put Def Leppard in the sort of pantheon of heavy metal hard rock bands? Would they be in your top 10? Would they not be in your top 10?
Oh man, I'm gonna do it almost by song from that perspective, but totally, of course. There's, they're one of the staples. But Led Zeppelin's always going to be at the top of my heart for that. But more relate to, and then Kiss is just such a great theme show.
Yeah. Aaron, I know you like to make running tracks of these, although you're not running. Like, where would you put some of these bands, and what would be on your list of? Maybe not to run to, but to go, get out some aggression.
So for me, Def Leppard is top 5 without a doubt. Led Zeppelin's up there, Metallica is up there, Guns N' Roses is up there. I actually run to just this heavy metal mix that is I don't know, 300-400 songs that I've been curating for the last 20 years or so in Apple Music and MP3s. So and those are all definite staples in the rotation.
Very good.
And Journey is too, by the way. I don't want to. So that was only half of that tour we talked about. I love some Journey, and even the new dude who, the most amazing story how they found the new singer to replace Steve Perry. I actually like him. He has his critics, but I really like him too.
Yeah. So if we end up going to that, we'll be interested to see that one. I haven't seen the new Journey singer. I know he was at a Cisco Live event a couple of years ago, and he sounds exactly like him, which is the really crazy part. But if you don't,
if YouTube in like Thailand or something,
we'll put that in the show notes for those of you that don't know the story and are kind of into music history and stuff. How Journey found their new sort of replacement singer. So it's a crazy story. Well, listen, enough donut talk and enough heavy metal talk, which maybe we should just do a donut and heavy metal podcast. Rob, it's good.
They go together.
It does go together. Rob, it's good to have you back. So I wanted to talk to you about this thing, and we brought it up on the year end show, and I sort of brought it up, and I only bring it up because I keep hearing these sort of rumblings, and you see articles written, and it kind of goes along this line of thinking, which is, sometimes we have these kind of really broad technology topics that we talk about, and there's lots of different points of view out there, but like around DevOps, the sort of spectrum that I see, and this is obviously way simplistic, but on one end you've got sort of Gene Kim and the Gene Kim book series and so forth, which is DevOps is nirvana. The companies that do DevOps are 1,000 times better than you. All this, like everything's perfect. On the other end, you have just pain and misery. Well, the other end of the spectrum has sort of become the DevOps Days tour. All the events that are out there, and those have sort of evolved to be very. They're very touchy-feely. It's a lot about, do we have empathy for our coworkers and do our bosses understand us? And then it feels like the reality is somewhere in between. And so I kind of wanted to bring you on as our chief DevOps correspondent to say, like, where is DevOps? Because it's not something you can buy. It's not something you can just push a button. You can't get it as a SaaS service. Like, why are people starting to question if DevOps is a thing?
It's a great question, and it is a real dilemma because I think DevOps, as we conceived about it, 5 years ago, and as we talked about it, is not what DevOps is today, which is what leads to this sort of confusion about it. And it definitely has a cultural component to it, where companies that have embraced sort of these lean methodologies that DevOps Days end up being all about, those companies do see benefits. It's almost like going back to the 90s with manufacturing, when people started doing just-in-time manufacturing, and it transformed the companies that did it, and they would talk about it and talk about how great they were. And in that case, it is a very real thing. The benefits are very real. Gene is not, hyping up something that's not there. It's a manufacturing process change that has, just like it had in physical manufacturing, has real benefits for software and IT processes. So it's totally a real thing. But there's a but, of course. The thing that we like to talk about as technologists are tools. And the DevOps community has had trouble getting the tools side of this conversation sort of to make as much sense as it had before, because saying automate all things, which is a great DevOps mantra, people sort of go scratch their head and they're like, well, I don't know, it doesn't make sense, or they look at what they're doing individually, and then that doesn't apply to somebody else. And so you end up at a DevOps Days, and somebody uses Chef, and somebody uses Puppet, and somebody uses Salt, and somebody says, that's all crazy, I use Ansible. They're all right, but they can't help each other because the conversation, the commonality in that conversation goes straight back to culture, and that's where we get these. They feel very emotional. DevOps Days where people are like, I can't get my boss to understand the value proposition, and it's a sort of this lonely battle.
Well, so Rob, let me kind of add maybe a little to that as well. First of all, I agree completely, but something else I've also kind of noticed, in addition to that kind of tool set, is this idea of labels and titles as well. You know, it's sometimes I felt like it was hard to solve the problem because it was hard to quantify the problem. Whether it was through tools or whether it was through titles and job labels and things like that. And so this next concept kind of came along, which was SRE, site reliability engineering. Is at the end of the day, is this just a new, better term for DevOps? And is everyone just, is this an evolution of all of this thinking into something we can put a name on and some process and tools behind?
Oh boy, this is a great question. And actually, I've done a little bit of talking about this in this sort of DevOps versus SRE conversation. And in some ways, I would step back into some people felt that DevOps was just a glorified name for sysadmin. And you end up generating a huge amount of hate in the community if you say you are a DevOps engineer. And so, because what DevOps is supposed to mean is it's supposed to mean this integration and shared work between developers and operators and other stakeholders too. So security, so you have DevSecOps coming into this process, or you have tests, you have product management, you have users, right? The idea of DevOps culturally was that it was supposed to represent this blending of responsibilities so that we stopped siloing our organizations and doing all these handoffs. And so you get a lot of pushback if you try and say I'm a DevOps engineer, I am a person doing this job, because there is no job for it. It's not supposed to be a job. Site reliability engineering is Google's definition of a job that incorporates a lot of DevOps principles as this sort of systems level thinking. And so Google did a really nice job. They came out with a book about a year ago, actually over a year ago now, that talked about their internal process for a department called Site Reliability Engineering that tried to fix their SysOps problem. And if you think about Google, Site Reliability Engineering can be a horrible name. You get into fights about it. All naming is hard. And some people prefer System Reliability Engineering instead of site. For Google, it's how did you keep the site up? Is the end user experience right? And then if you click back from that and you're like, okay, well, if keeping my site up means my data center has to be built and automated and robust, and I have to monitor it, and I have to be able to observe when there's problems, and I have to get the developers to fix bugs quickly when there's issues, and I have to test it. And you end up with this huge system-wide thinking that goes into that. But at the end of the day, somebody is keeping the lights on at the data center, and Google defines that group as a site reliability engineer. And there's a ton of I'll pause for a second to take other questions, but we can and should deconstruct site reliability engineering as a role that implements DevOps thinking more broadly in organizations.
So is it safe to say, and we can go into the details in a second, but I do want to ask a follow-up before we go into those details. So it's safe to say SRE is almost an expansion of that concept in some ways. But in just like a commentary about the DevOps engineer thing specifically, and like DevOps certifications and DevOps in a title, and like you were saying, it's really more of a fluid process. And it almost became, in my mind, a little bit like Fight Club. Like you couldn't talk about it, right? And it just,
I'm laughing with you. Yes.
It just got a little squirrely, and maybe SRE is both an expansion of the terms, an evolution of the terms, and it seems safe to talk about.
Well, it's a person with a job, and a job with a definition. I mean, this is like when we would talk about DevOps tools, people's eyes would turn red. And so you would want to say, oh, I'm using Chef and Puppet or Salt and Ansible, or whatever automation packaging you wanted to use. And and you would say, and I'm doing DevOps with it, and smoke would start filling the room from people grinding their teeth. That wasn't productive, and I have a blanket statement, right? I don't believe in DevOps shaming. Don't tell people they're using the word wrong. Don't do it. It's just not helpful. Lately, I've been really excited because you can say I'm an SRE, and people know that you mean I do DevOps type work, and there's it sort of bypasses that part of the conversation, which is great. Well, but there aren't SRE tools for that. I haven't seen a market of SRE tools pop up either.
Right. Well, it kind of hits the other side of the coin, right? Where you're saying, you're sort of laughing when Aaron said, well, DevOps doesn't fit a title, it doesn't whatever. And I almost wonder if we still sort of get enamored with somebody like Netflix or Werner Vogels at Amazon, says something like, well, the new world is you write the code, you support it. And I really wonder, like, we've all heard that statement forever, just like we've heard people like Mark Zuckerberg say, like, go fast and break things and so forth. And it's almost like people are afraid to raise their hand and go like, whoa, hold on. Like, we're not doing that. Like, we just don't have developers that want to wear a pager, and our ops people, whether they're called SREs or whatever, they don't write code. Like, you're a unicorn or an elephant or whatever. Like, I mean, is there some reality to that? Like, people just didn't want to raise their hand and go, bullshit. I don't buy into that. That's not realistic.
I'm really glad you bring that up, because I think that that's a fallacy. I think that full stack engineers are a unicorn. I'm sorry about bruising your full stack engineer's resume and ego and things like that. But the reality is that if you can't start building an application until you find a person who can understand every piece of that stack from the BIOS up, and I know that people define full stack engineer a whole bunch of ways, but it's not, you can't find a fleet of full stack engineers to then go build an application. We build applications by having some segmentation of concerns. And so the whole serverless, and another term that makes people just go nuts, the whole serverless movement in a way is developers saying, I don't want to mess with infrastructure anymore. And it doesn't mean that there isn't any infrastructure. What it means is that you've segmented your concerns so developers can worry about code, pipelines, quality, shipping code, monitoring it, doing all the things they still have to do, owning that code into delivery, but not owning the responsibility for the infrastructure. And so I think there's a big degree of which operators and top flight operators who really understand, and I would call those SREs, who really understand the infrastructure side of this equation are very much needed, have a lot of play in how the things get built and what gets done. And it's a mistake to think that you're going to hire developers and have them manage infrastructure. That's not how they're incented, right? They're trying to build features, not necessarily drive reliability and manage and monitor the site.
Right. Now, kind of following up on that, being less blasphemous. People.
It doesn't matter. Everyone shut off the podcast.
I love being blasphemous.
They're so mad at us.
No. I'm poking at myself more than anything. We heard years ago, Netflix would give talks. Adrian would give talks, and he would go, "Yeah, we do microservices." And then you sort of had this. The chorus came out. Well, if Netflix does microservices, everybody should do microservices. And now you've got SRE, which on one hand, you can look at it and you go, wow, it is a nice progression because you can define it as a role. People aren't afraid to call it for it to be their job title. But in this case, it's coming from Google, and we've all sort of learned over the last 5, 6, 7 years of trying to chase building clouds and so forth. Like, not everybody has Google problems or Google scale problems or whatever. Like, is SRE going to be something that is really kind of only useful for Google, or do you get a sense that what's in there is adaptable to people that aren't Google, that are in Texas or in Ohio or in aren't in Silicon Valley web scale companies?
So it's 100% adaptable, and it's unfortunate a little bit because Google puts so much wind behind these sails that there's a tendency to think of SRE as Google process. I did a video with Charity Majors brilliant SRE, brilliant, doing a lot of observability work. And I gave you a link for the show notes. It's really short, but she was very tied up in, that's Google, we don't like it. A lot of people don't believe in Google's models. And I think if you decompose what SRE is trying to accomplish and sort of say, yeah, I don't have to be at Google scale to have pay equity between operations and engineering, right? The E is for engineer. And so that, something as simple as pay equity between operations and engineering means that you establish equivalence in the organization so operators can stand up and say, and you might say, they could do this without pay equity. Pay equity sends a big signal. That the operators can stop and say, this is not ready for production. We are not going to put this in. You haven't done all the work that we need to manage and sustain it. We're building Kubernetes infrastructure, and you need to use our Kubernetes infrastructure and monitor it in a way that we can help you. Those are all really important things. And that's a lot of what, when you peel back what SRE as defined by Google, and the market's sort of doing its own things with SRE now. But they said things very clearly about having engineers, site reliability engineers, have control, be able to stop an infrastructure, have a budget where developers can't walk away from a project if their defects are above a certain rate. Also, and expect operators to be writing coding automation so that they're not falling behind, right? Limit technical debt. There's some really basic concepts that up-level an operations team that are universal, right? That I think when you look at what Gene Kim is saying about continuous deployment and lean, those are exactly what he's getting at in everything he talks about, what those winning organizations have been able to do. So you might not call it an SRE, but that's what you're doing. That's how you're empowering these operations teams.
Well, and let me ask a follow-up to that, because again, this theme of relating it to almost like non-Silicon Valley, right? So there is a lot of folks that listen to this show that are infrastructure and ops-centric people. And, we've been talking about it for years of, okay, learning automation and learning some basic programming, something even as simple as Python, PowerShell, and just scripting in general. But at least to what I've heard so far is SREs are often described as almost programmers living in an ops world, as opposed to infrastructure people kind of moving forward into programming. And so can folks that are out there that are infrastructure and ops backgrounds, can they evolve into SREs? What's your thoughts on that?
Oh, totally. I think that we have to get over the idea that scripting is not coding. And so it's easy to fall into this trap of saying, oh, I want to hire some coding operators, right? Basically develop, people who spend all their day coding. One of the things in an operations environment, one of the things that you need to think through on SREs is that they don't stop operating. The operational experience, being on call, having hands-on responsibility for running a system and learning how to dig in logs and troubleshoot problems and do postmortems, those skills are not, you don't want to walk away from them in doing this. You're not hiring an SRE or a DevOps person to an operations team to go solve all the coding problems for that team. What you're really trying to do is bring the whole team up so that everybody can share some responsibilities. And you might, things are going to be a little fluid. Different people have different skill sets. But if you're an operator, you need to be able to understand how to script and automate and integrate and build those skills up, and then critically invest. The employers have to invest in helping operators who aren't as confident in that have the time to build the skills. And the simplest answer is not that I think that operators and sysadmins aren't able to do this. In a lot of cases, they're not given the time to do it. And this was a big thing about what SREs do. You have to create some breathing room for the teams so that they're proactively solving or automating, fixing problems, so that they're not repeating, oh, this broke, I'm going to go fix it by typing, drop tables into the database again. I'm going to go back and fix this problem, root cause it. And in some cases, SRE is as simple as saying we are going to give our teams enough slack that they fix root cause problems. And to do that, you have to be able to automate. You have to be able to go through it. And that might mean training. It might mean hiring a consultant to help get you up to speed and get some base things going. It might mean funding projects that do a more integrated approach to deployments. That's what RackN does. And those are things where you come back and say, all right, we actually want to pay down this technical debt and fix our operations environment. That doesn't require a master's in computer science. It shouldn't.
Yeah. Have you found, because a lot of times you'll run into the conversation around automation where people will sort of, it's the same old sort of argument about kind of pushing things off until tomorrow, but it becomes, it's kind of, well, we'd like to automate that stuff, but the cost of learning the automation tool, spending the time to automate it, like I could just have, Jimmy or Mary just, write it, type it out and make it work right now, and we'll just get it done and we'll come back to it later. Like in making the case for, investing in training, doing the automation, putting things as infrastructure as code or whatever it might be, like, have you found anybody who does a really good job, or yourself, to kind of make the business case for saying, look, here's the way to think about it, or here's the way to pitch it to your boss, or here's the way to get the funding for that project to get out of this technical debt, if you will?
Right. Well, there's always a specter of a meltdown around the corner.
Yeah.
Well done.
That's horrible. Thank you. The reality is that this is a CIO, director of engineering, director of ops. They have to start thinking through agility, keeping up with changes, right? Building pipelines. A lot of what I see DevOps having morphed into is pipeline conversations instead of tools conversations. And I think that's where DevOps went. When I'm going to DevOps Days, besides the Hug Ops, which is awesome and we need it, we're also having conversations about shifting left, right? Which means I'm putting my processes into a pipeline, I'm automating, I'm doing a continuous integration, continuous deployment pipeline, and automating it. So the DevOps conversations from 5 years ago are still very much there. They look much more like CI/CD conversations. And so there are questions about how do you convince an organization that they need to care about this. In a lot of cases, what's happening is we're having conversations about building continuous pipelines, and that to me is a very productive way to start with this, where we're saying where you're not trying to convince somebody we need to be more agile, or we need to worry about patching firmware and RAID and BIOS. Those small battles are very, very hard to win because you can't fix them by themselves. So if you up-level it into a continuous deployment, a continuous integration to stop breaking so much and fight that battle, that's actually a much easier battle to fight. And you can explain it to a boss. You can explain it to somebody writing a check to say, all right, we have to stop solving all these problems as isolated problems. We have to start solving them as connected problems. And then if you come in with a pipeline solution, that often fixes things. There's a couple other, and the other thing that we're seeing a lot of interest in is immutability and portability. So those are other keywords that might not sound like they're helping you solve an SRE ops problem, but they're very easy for somebody writing checks and budgets to understand how they're shifting left, how we're creating more repeatable operational environments, fewer crises. We can respond when the internet breaks us again. Because that the latest security patch is not the end of the road, right? It's accelerating.
Right.
Rob, what is your thoughts on, flip side of that? So, a lot of this is okay, how do we get started, and then how do we get things going? But then, let's think, super long term for a second. What is your thoughts on, people sticking around and retention and, developing a system and staying with it? Because the other thing I tend to see a lot, whether it was the OpenStack community way back when, or the evolutions of all of the, technology waves we've been riding, you'll see a certain amount of folks that get something going, and then they realize, hey, I have value in this market now. And then it becomes a little bit of like you can almost follow folks from company to company or process to process. And so how, flip that on its head for a second and go, how do folks, fight the long-term fight sometimes as well?
Oh, boy. It's a great observation. And we were doing a lot of SRE work, right, and writing and talking to SREs a year ago. And we came up with this sort of SRE half-life problem, which maybe sounds worse than SRE job half-life problem. What we were finding was that a lot of companies were hiring, SREs or operations architects, somebody to come in and fix all their IT woes and modernize. And those people were lasting in their jobs about 9 months on average, which is not very long. Which is exactly what I see you're looking at. It's like, oh, I come in, I'm going to make a big impact. But the reality is that they have a lot of trouble translating these great big visions of multi-cloud integrated hybrid data centers with synergistic, containerized, Dockerized infrastructure. Trademark that. The reality is that it is really, really hard to get those things through an operational cycle. And a lot of times the operational people in the organization who were there before that SRE architect was hired and will be there after that SRE architect departs, do resist the change that's coming. And so what we really like to help people with and talk about is figure out ways that you can create tooling that helps the base level first. Don't try and add a thing on top and not fix the underlying problem. This is I've involved in OpenStack for a long time, and one of the things that I saw and my team saw with OpenStack was that while you could put OpenStack on top of an infrastructure and make things better, we didn't actually address running the infrastructure itself. We were trying to sort of hide it. So VMware's done that really successfully for a long time, and as people tried to do it with commodity infrastructure and open infrastructure, the lack of consistent operations really burned people, and we ended up with deploying software that should have been very similar, but in millions of snowflaked ways. So none of the operators got to share learnings, and nobody really got accelerated benefit. And I was listening to the PodCuddle about the PodCuddle podcast about Helm, and you were talking about Helm and saying, well, first you fork your Helm chart and then you start using it. And my head just exploded, right? This is exactly what we see happen in operations in general. What makes operations so hard and not survivable day two is we create these forks of operational practice. And wow, people need to think about this very carefully, because you can't just turn around and say, hey, make your operations environment look just like mine. If you're going to do that, just move to Amazon or one of the other cloud providers. They're all good. But the reality is that everybody's operation is a little bit different, and then we have to find ways to do commonalities and do less forking. So, right, drive operations changes back into your infrastructure, find composable ways to reuse software. One of my soapboxes here, though, is that you look at some of these great tools that we see in market, really popular ones, even something like Ansible or Terraform or Chef or Puppet. They're not really designed to compose automation in a way that lets you keep, and the operative word is keep, borrowing pieces in an upgradable way. We work really hard in I run a project called Digital Rebar for Boot Pixie Provision. We work really hard to try and eliminate that problem, but it's hard. We fight it every single day. And that's why operations doesn't scale horizontally the way we see other things scaling. I wish I had a better answer for that one. We see this as the thing that makes operations sort of suck. you're alone in your infrastructure.
It's a lonely, lonely job.
Yeah.
One of my pet projects is trying to get Kubernetes operators to work together. So we run a cluster ops SIG. We're actually switching to a meetup format. In some ways to be joint therapy. But getting somebody to come and talk about their operations environment is really hard because they don't feel like anybody else has the same pain. And that's one of the things that I think makes these day two problems really tricky, because you own it, and as soon as you start to drift from other people, it becomes much harder for you to pop up on a Slack channel and ask for help.
Yeah, the old adage of, okay, I have this problem, but hold on, I have to give you 10 minutes of backstory before I get to how you can relate to my problem.
And then somebody says, oh, and you're using, Red Hat or, instead of Canonical or Debian, and you're like, I can't help you. Sorry. And you're like, that's not my problem. You're like, I don't know. Sorry. Right. This is what makes operations really hard, and why we need to invest in more automation. As you automate things better, you actually insulate yourself from some of those changes. Now, we were talking about making operators better developers, and this is part of the investment, because I do think operators have a tendency to not think through some of what they've been doing. They don't have all the computer science background, and they need that training so that they can build much more reusable automation. And then demand more reusable automation from their vendors and communities.
Yeah. Well, listen, Rob, I have a few other questions, but I think if we got into them, we may end up going into what would have to be sort of a part 2 of a show. So I'm going to save them to the next time we have you back on. Before we chase you off, what's the latest on RackN? Where can people, what cool things are you guys building these days or focusing on, and what's the best way for people to kind of reach out and get you guys to help them do some cool automation stuff?
So, oh boy, RackN has been we've been having a blast. So we're on version 3 of Digital Rebar, which is it's a Golang based physical workload automation platform. It's super lightweight, 5-minute install type thing, very easy to learn, and then can do multi-boot cycles. So we're doing like immutable Kubernetes deployments as a reference workload. It's one of those things where this is Gen 4 for us. We started way back in the Crowbar days for people who've known me for a long time. And we finally built this sort of easy to use composable hardware automation. And we're getting great feedback in the communities. We're having a lot of fun sort of taking on new problems. And so when it comes down to actually automating and integrating and helping people solve problems, it's been sort of neat to have people get excited about ops. And people can check it out. It's rebar.digital for the open source side of what we do, and then that'll take you into a place where you can easily extend those architectures. And there's some of what we're talking about has been a big lesson for us, in that you can't show up with pie in the sky, hybrid multi-cloud. We stopped trying to do that. And in some cases, we're just going to help you boot machines and not add a lot into it until you feel pretty good about that. And believe it or not, that's a really good strategy for operators who just need to do things like replace Cobbler, because there's no support for it anymore. It's real pragmatic stuff, and that's what we like.
Yeah. It may not be sexy, but it gets the job done, right?
Yeah. And then we've been playing with Edge too. So
nice, good.
Oh my goodness, we think Edge is super exciting. The problem space is just fun.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, listen,
so, Rob, I just wanted to close it out here and just say, actually, we always put a lot of show notes in, but definitely take a look at the show notes with this one. We'll have links in there to the video Rob mentioned. We've got links to the books. This is one, definitely, if this is a topic that is interesting to you, take some time and definitely go through the show notes on this one. And so with that, for Rob and for Brian and myself, thank you very much for listening, everyone, and we'll talk to you next week.
Thank you for listening to the Cloudcast. Please visit thecloudcast.net to find more podcasts, show notes, and everything social media. And visit acloud.guru for all your cloud training needs.